everyone, it's Emily Herring again, naturalist with Marshall County Conservation, and I thought I'd put together another video for you. One of my favorite signs of spring, and I feels like spring is really here, is when the frogs start to sing. And so this little video is going to be about our frogs and amphibians in the springtime. So if you've been outside at all, you've probably heard frogs singing, although a lot of times we don't actually know that it's frogs that we're listening to. Of course, every frog has their own song, and so you can actually identify them by their song, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Now, before we go that far, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about frogs themselves and what kind of creatures they are, and they are amphibians. And amphibians are awesome creatures. Their name actually means two lives, and what that means is that they spend their life in two different places. They spend half their life in the water and half their life on land. Now, amphibians are really cool creatures, and they have specific characteristics that we think about when we're identifying an animal and whether or not it is an amphibian. So, for example, amphibians, they have vertebrae or backbone, so they're just like mammals. However, they are different in mammals in other ways. So one characteristic, they have a backbone. Two, they're cold-blooded, ectothermic. So unlike humans or mammals, they actually get their temperature from their surrounding environment. So we start to hear frogs sing really early in the spring. They wait for that time when it starts to warm up. In fact, throughout the seasons, spring all the way into summer, depending on the temperature, is when you can hear different frogs singing. They have to wait till it gets warm enough till they start their reproductive process. So in the summer, we'll start to hear bullfrogs, whereas we won't hear bullfrogs now. Right now we're hearing things like leopard frogs and chorus frogs, and that's because they're okay with the cooler temperatures, whereas bullfrogs, not so much. So they are ectothermic or cold-blooded. They have the backbone. And of course, frogs, like I said before, they have two lives. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that they spend half their life in the water and half their life on land. And they go through metamorphosis, just like a butterfly or a caterpillar does, except their metamorphosis is a little different. They start off in the water as an egg and then transform into a tadpole, and then a froglet, and then a frog or a toadlet, depending on what kind of creature it is. So their larva stage, or what they come out after the egg, is a tadpole for a frog. So they don't look like their moms when they are first born. They have to go through a change before they can turn into a frog. Now, the first part of that is that also they come from eggs. They are oviparous. It's a fun word to say, so I always like to throw it out there. They are oviparous. Animals that give birth to live babies, like humans, are viviparous, but frogs and amphibians are oviparous. So they lay eggs, and they have to lay their eggs in the water because their larvae live in the water. So we've got that they have a backbone, they're cold-blooded, they're oviparous, and that they go through metamorphosis. Those are all important things that make an amphibian an amphibian. Now, another thing, when we think about amphibians versus reptiles, reptiles actually have scaly skin, and they are not amphibians. Amphibians have slimy skin. So if you've caught a frog before, you know that their skin is wet and slimy. It's actually able to absorb things through their skin. They absorb their water through their moisture through their skin. And if you have any chemicals on your hands, you can actually get those chemicals on the amphibian as well, and they can absorb that into their skin. So it's important when you're handling amphibians that your hands are clean, because you don't want to make them sick because they're very sensitive. So they've got slimy skin, backbones, lay eggs. The babies don't look like their mamas. They go through metamorphosis, and they're cold-blooded. So they're really cool creatures that are considered amphibians. Now, amphibians in Iowa include toads, frogs, salamanders, newts. So we have quite a few different species of amphibians, although we don't find very many of them, and sometimes they're hard to find. A lot of that is because they usually are pretty well camouflaged. Now, in the springtime, hands down, one of my family's favorite things to do is to go to a wetland. Now, when I say a wetland is a shallow area, usually, that has a layer of water over it. The soil underneath that wetland is saturated or soaked with water, and it's usually pretty muddy and mucky, but it needs to be able to support plants that like to grow into water, and animals that thrive in water. And that is what a wetland is. Now, we have wetlands here at the Grimes farm, and there's also wetlands all over the place. I live in the town of Eldora, and we're lucky enough to have a wetland in our town, and it's a small little wetland, but it's perfect for going and exploring. In fact, you usually don't have to go through very far to find a little wetland. You may be even able to go out into the ditch in front of your yard and find cattails or frogs or different creatures that need water to be able to survive, and that they're living there in your ditch. And so that's all you need to go to find these kind of creatures and to explore. Now, a wetland doesn't have to be wet all year long. In fact, oftentimes wetlands are seasonal, and so they'll dry up in the warm summer months, but then have water in the spring when the snow is melted and the rains come. So wetlands are a great place to explore. So look around your area, find a wetland. Make sure that when you go out that you're still keeping a safe distance from everybody and keeping yourself and others healthy. But why don't we put on our boots and we'll head out the door and go see what we can find at the wetland. So we are here at the wetland, and this is just a little wetland that is close to our house that we love to come and explore. Spring is a great time, and we have found at least 4 different types of amphibians that live here in the wetland. So we're pretty excited. We bring some nets. Of course, everything we catch we release and give back to nature, but you have to make sure that you handle animals carefully, but it's a good time to go out and see what you can find in your wetland. So we were able to catch 1 amphibian species so far, and that is, see if I can grab a hold of him, this guy right here.
Can I pet him? Can I? Please.
Oh, let's listen. Shh.
They do not like each other.
So I hope you guys can sing in the microphone, buddy. So hopefully you could hear that snoring kind of sound. That's what this type of frog makes. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll hold him up. He's got spots on him like a leopard, and that is because he is a leopard frog. And I keep calling it a he for a reason. He is a he because he makes sound. It is the male frogs that make the sound. And why do they make that sound? To attract mates. And that's what they do this time of year, is that they're attracting mates. So they're here and they are attracting mates, and then they are laying and fertilizing eggs. So this is a leopard frog. This is about the normal size of a leopard frog. You can see his nice, strong, long legs made for jumping, and then his wonderfully webbed feet. You can see his webbed feet there, made for swimming. And so this guy is just an awesome little leopard frog. We're going to put him back in so he can do what he does best, and that is have new babies and sing for us in our spring nights. Okay. So right here we have a leopard frog, and he's blending in really well with his environment with those spots. That's what the spots are all about, is to help them to be able to camouflage. They're kind of hard to find when you look for them. In fact, I'm going to put a picture up here in just a second, and I want you to tell me how many frogs you can find, because around me right now I can find at least 6 frogs. Not in necessarily this picture, but they're blend into this environment with the reeds and the mud of the wetlands. So I'll put up a picture and tell me how many frogs can you find. All right, how many frogs did you find? If you found 4, you are correct. The other really cool things we found, because the frogs are really active here at the wetland, are these. I don't know if you can see them. I'll try to let it focus a little bit. So those are frog eggs. I'm presuming that they probably are leopard frog eggs, because that's what they're around, and there are literally thousands and thousands of frog eggs. Now, I can identify these as frog eggs versus toad's eggs because frog eggs are actually laid in a clump. So when I hold this up, they're all in one gigantic clump. If I come back here in a couple of weeks, the toads should be singing by then. And if I pick up toad eggs, usually American toad eggs, we pick them up, they are laid in a string, like a shoestring. And so you can see a big string of eggs. So depending on if it's a frog or a toad, you can kind of tell by the shapes of the eggs. And these are definitely a large clump of frog eggs. So we will kind of explore here more and see what else we can find in our wetland. So we actually came out the next day to a little different wetland because I was kind of surprised we couldn't hear any of these frogs at the last wetland we were at. I hope you can all hear that noise. Those are coarse frogs. I've also heard a tree frog, which is the first tree frog I heard this year. I'd like to say that I'm going to catch one of these frogs. However, we've been out here for over an hour and I've only seen one and I wasn't fast enough for it. They're tiny frogs, about the size of a quarter, and they're striped and they camouflage in so well. So I thought that I would show you a picture of what they look like. So let's see if you can get that. So that is what the chorus frog looks like, and you can see that's a person's hand. So they're quite small, very hard to catch, obviously. And I may try to catch a few more, and hopefully I'll find one. But if not, I did stumble upon some of their tadpoles, which can kind of show you how small they really are. But I thought what I'd do is I would walk into the wetland because it's really cool what they do. Their senses are so good, and their hearing and probably touch tells them when something is near that's not supposed to be near. And so it makes finding them even more hard because they don't keep singing when you get close. Instead, they go silent. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop this video and then I'm going to turn it back on and walk into the wetland so you can see the effect me walking into the wetland has on the frog. As we stand right here from the wetland, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk into the wetland to show you their response to a strange object coming into their environment. So whenever I get close, they stop singing. Now, you usually have to get about 5 or 10 feet away until they stop singing. So there were probably 4 or 5 at least in this area that were singing, just a couple of seconds ago. But as soon as I get close, so you can see when I get close to this wetland over here, they shut off. It's pretty amazing. It's a way to help protect themselves. Obviously, they don't want to get eaten, and so they sing for their mates until they think they're in danger, and then they turn off their voices. Now again, it's only these males that are singing for their mate that are making all of this noise, but it becomes pretty quiet once something that could harm them comes into the area. Now, if I stayed here for about 5 minutes, they'd start singing up again, and it'd be no big deal, but as soon as I'd move, it would all shut back off again. Okay, so here we are. I was able to find a few of their babies. These are actually smaller than the mosquito larvae, which is kind of crazy to think about, but these are their tadpoles, hatched this spring. They overwinter as adults, and then they lay eggs as soon as they can when the spring warms up. And so in here you can see just a few of them, and also there's a cool little bug there which is called a scud, but there are a few tadpoles. There's one right there swimming around, and these are the tadpoles of the coarse frog. So they're tiny. In fact, I'm going to pause it just 1 second and I'll put one in my hand so you can see how small they really are. So there is my thumb, and that is a tadpole. You'll notice there's lots of other aquatic creatures that live in this water, but that tadpole is tiny. It's smaller than a pinky. It's just absolutely tiny. So I was finally able to catch a little forest frog. You can see by my hand how small they truly are. Pretty hard to find, but they do make a lot of ruckus in the spring. They have those stripes on their back that helps them to be able to camouflage and blend in well, and they're a fun little frog if you can find them. So I was able to catch another amphibian. This is a toad. You can see that he has bumps on his body, which is a good distinguishing factor for a toad. Those big bumps on the back of his head are actually glands that hold toxins, so that way if they get caught, they release them. Toxin that makes it so other animals don't want to eat them. Right next to that, there's kind of a circle flat area. That's actually his ear. And you can see him, he's kind of got his throat pouched out a little bit there. That's how they make their song, of course, to sing for their mates. And this is a male. He's been screaming at me to let him go. And so that is what I'm going to do. So a toad can trill for almost an entire minute if they want to. That's them puffing up their air throat sac to be able to sing. So I was able to nab one more amphibian. This is a cricket frog. You'll notice it has bumps on its back. That is a good identification factor of a cricket frog. Sometimes they have X's on their backs as well. Their song is much different than the chorus frog and the toad. It's more of a sound of marbles clicking together. So this is a full-grown frog. Doesn't get much larger than a quarter. Another one of our little frogs that make a lot of noise in the spring wetlands. So here are the amphibians that we saw today and the sounds that they make. So when you're out exploring, you can identify what you're hearing. All right, let's finish up this video with an activity. We are going to turn you into an amphibian and you have to try to control your body temperature. Now remember, amphibians are ectothermic or cold-blooded. That means that they rely on their environment to be able to keep their body temperature the right amount. So what you're going to do is you are going to pick a temperature anywhere between approximately 50 and 80 degrees. Now let's say you pick 70 degrees. You're going to take your thermometer and you are going to try to find a location around your home that is 70 degrees. It could be indoors, it could be outdoors, doesn't really matter, but you're going to find that location and you got to find just the right location for it to be 70 degrees. I'll give you a little bit of wiggle room. How about 2 degrees below 70 degrees and 2 degrees above? So for your amphibian to be happy and for you to be able to survive, you need to find a location that's somewhere between 68 and 72 degrees. See how hard it is for an amphibian to be able to control their body temperatures. You can use things like wind, you can use sun, shade to find out exactly how hard it is to be an amphibian and control your body temperature by the things that are going on outside. Thanks for learning about amphibians with me today. If you have any questions, you can always email me, and hopefully our paths will cross soon.